the Pet Health and Happiness podcast from Bella+Duke, keeping you at the cutting edge of pet nutrition, behaviour and health with expert interviews, mythbusters and more to help your pet lead a healthier, happier life.
Okay, everybody, welcome. And on this week's episode with me, Rowan, CNO, Chief Nutritional Officer at Bella+Duke, we have the luxury, we have the pleasure, we have the delight of the eminent Dr. Gary Richter, who has very kindly joined us all the way from San Francisco Bay Area. Dr. Richter, welcome.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
For those of us, or for those of our listeners, Dr. Gary, who have been living either somewhere hidden under a bushel or in a remote part of the planet, you are the much celebrated author of a great manual of pet wellness. Would you care to take a couple of moments and introduce yourself and have a quick chat about your book before we move on to this week's topic?
Sure, absolutely. So as you said, my name is Gary Richter. I've been a veterinarian in the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically Oakland, for a little over 20 years. And during that time, I really started my career as a very sort of conventional Western trained veterinarian. And over time, I have shifted pretty dramatically to what I would describe as integrative medicine. So meaning that I haven't by any stretch turned my back on Western medical care, but what I've done is I've combined that with holistic and natural medicine and on other modalities of medicine that are, shall we say, a little bit off the beaten path, from a conventional medical standpoint, in order to get better outcomes, keep my patients healthy, restore health in a much more effective way than I was ever able to as a purely Western veterinarian. As such, several years ago, I wrote a book called The Ultimate Pet Health Guide. And that book was it's really sort of an amalgamation of almost everything that I would tell a pet owner that might be sitting right in front of me in my office, ranging anywhere from what they should feed their pet to how to keep them healthy to how to treat and or resolve various types of medical conditions using both Western and holistic therapies. And I also, there's a pretty long discussion in the book as well, as far as homemade diets as well, if that's something that people are interested in doing. So really, where I'm coming from as a doctor is both a perspective of proactive preventative medicine, as well as using integrative care from a therapeutic standpoint.
I love this on so many different levels. One, it really resonates with me from the approach I took with human clients on a functional medicine perspective. And I really like the fact that you've melded both, shall we say, traditional Western approaches with more holistic elements.
Yes.
I think quite often people become very, shall we say, energized and enervated about it, and they believe it's either one or the other, when actually and maybe this is a slogan for modern times, particularly now, together we're stronger. And these two components give us a much more holistic view of the issue. So I believe you also delved into quite substantially into acupuncture and chiropractic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, acupuncture is so often overlooked or dismissed, and it's so potent.
Yeah, it's incredibly effective. And then, you combine that with herbal therapy and with Western medicine as needed, and magic can happen with these patients.
Yeah, I love that. We've got several very friendly vets here in the UK from the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society who are doing a similar concept. They're
Lovely.
looking at the best and the most applicable of Western medicine, or shall we say modern medicine. It's potent and it's advanced for a reason, but that doesn't mean it's superior or can work in exclusion to these other therapies that you're also embracing. So that's awesome.
Wonderful.
One of the messages that I particularly like, and you allude to in this book, which incidentally I have a copy of, so if you could virtually sign it for me, that would be awesome.
Will do.
All right, thank you. You've heard it. Everybody is committed to that. Is that realistically, quite often people may fall into the trap of thinking feeding healthy is either too onerous or too expensive, or that simply by investing in a really expensive grain-free processed dog food, they're getting most of the marks. And you really eloquently disabuse this. Could you basically talk us through your, shall we say, guiding philosophies on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I think the place to start with nutrition is realize that our bodies, our pets' bodies, they are designed from a biological and physiologic sense to function optimally on a certain spectrum of nutrients. I mean, to use an analogy, it's no different than my car in the sense that my car was engineered to run on a certain type of gasoline, a certain type of motor oil, etc. You can potentially put other types of fuel and oil in the car and have it run, but it's not going to run as efficiently or as appropriately as it was designed to do. And really the same is true for a biological system, except of course there's no engineer, sitting in a lab somewhere designing what that body is supposed to run on. It's a question of evolution. So step one is looking at what any given animal, what they evolved to eat and what they evolved to function on optimally, and then really starting from there and working outward at that point. So as is the case with any animal on the planet, we all evolved to eat fresh whole food diets. Nobody evolved to eat food out of a bag or a can or something that was processed at high pressures and high temperatures. We're all optimally designed to eat fresh whole food diets. So really that's step number one. Step number two, when we look at these highly processed foods, which basically any canned food or any kibble qualifies as highly processed foods, what we see is really two things. Number one, because of the high temperatures and the high pressures, there are nutrients that are destroyed in the processing that our animals would otherwise benefit from. And number two, because of those very same temperatures and pressures, there are chemical compounds that are created just as a byproduct of the processing that actually promote inflammation and cause cancer. And quite frankly, this is not a new concept. This is not questionable science. I mean, this has been very, very well delineated in the research. It's just not something that's really out there in the public sphere. Because, as I often tell people, dry food and canned food really only exists for one reason, and that reason is our convenience. It was never about what was best for the dog. And quite frankly, the companies that are making these foods full well know that, but it's purely a supply and demand issue. As long as there's people out there that are wanting to buy that food, they're going to sell it. And the unfortunate part about it is that, the advertising and the marketing of these foods is such that it would lead somebody to believe that if they're buying an expensive bag of dry dog food, then they are giving their pet optimal nutrition. Just to take a for example, like if you look at a really expensive bag of dog food, you look at the ingredients list on there, and there's going to be some really, really good ingredients on there. Then look in the bag and ask yourself, how much does that food actually resemble the ingredients? We've all seen or vegetables that are cooked to death. We've seen that in our own lives, and you don't need a PhD in nutrition to look at that piece of broccoli that's been cooked till it's gray, that there's no nutrition left in that vegetable. And that's really what we're up against from a fresh food versus processed food perspective with our pets.
That's a lovely and eloquent summary, and echoes all of our sentiments here at Bella+Duke. Quite often, would understand that acrylamide is associated with cancer.
Yep.
But have they realized that by ultra heat processing a protein, not only does it get denatured, but there are acrylamides and a whole host of other reactions like Maillard reactions, which when you see the marketing around vet approved and these healthy vegetables and these leaping dogs and other kinds of trademark terms associated with medical benefits, of course, to the, most, I would think, pet guardians operate from a good place and they don't need to go around being skeptical. But ultimately, all of these cancer-causing chemicals are just being hidden under marketing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's so true. And in many ways, all of this, as you say, it very much mirrors, how we as humans eat. And let's be honest, we all know from our own lives that eating fresh whole foods, eating healthy, it's a little bit more difficult from the standpoint of what it might cost to get those fresh ingredients, the amount of time you have to put in preparation, these sorts of things. It takes a little more work than, say, going off to the drive-thru and getting a cheeseburger and French fries. I think the inherent problem that we as humans have is we're not super good at dealing with long-term dangers. We're very good at the house is on fire, what do I do right now? But I think evolutionarily speaking, we're not really wired to say, is this food I'm feeding my dog or is this food that I'm eating myself going to potentially cause major health problems years down the road? I think I think of it often as, people that smoke cigarettes, they know intuitively that that's bad for them, but somehow, every cigarette they light up, they're not thinking like, this is going to kill me one day. Because we just don't tend to think that far ahead. And people are trained to look, to sort of seek out convenient, to seek out what seems economical. But the reality is, particularly as it pertains to pet care, you maybe could spend a little bit more on food right now, put a little bit more effort into what you're feeding your pet. But down the road, you are going to save so much on healthcare costs, and you are going to be rewarded with a healthier animal that very likely will live longer and better than they otherwise would. Again, it's just a question of, can you step back and see that big picture view?
Wow. This is truly serendipity. We've been having this exact conversation at work today. We know that with everything going on in the world, that some people are operating, and understandably, and I say that from a place of compassion, with that extra frisson of fear, and do have concerns about finance. And our point has always been that to feed healthy, full stop, is an investment. And as I was interviewing Dana Scott from Dogs Naturally magazine a couple of months ago, and she really just succinctly summarized nutrition, healthcare, medicine, sick care. Invest in one, avoid the other. And it was really that simple.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, and this is something else you discuss really in your book and alluded to, you said it's cheaper than it may seem. And ultimately, this is another thing, is when you actually look at some of the very expensive processed foods, on a meal per meal basis, they're actually more expensive than, for instance, a complete balanced raw provider. And we've seen that quite often. We've actually done quite a few comparisons.
Yeah,
Bear with me, Gary. Sorry, I'll just let you. We'll cut that. Sorry, it's a bit of a... Cool. Sorry, please continue.
Okay. So I mean, it's really quite surprising when you look at some of these super premium dog foods, the processed foods, how expensive that bag of dog food has become.
Oh, surely.
I mean, it's very expensive, and I think what's happened is the pet food companies have really sort of tapped into, into this sort of association that we tend to make with very expensive means very high quality, which is sometimes true, but not always true. But I think if you look at it on a meal per meal basis, it really just depends on what sort of fresh food you might be looking at. So for example, if you're looking at a prepackaged, either frozen raw food or even frozen lightly cooked food diet, I mean, that's probably the most expensive fresh food diet that you can buy, is something that's frozen, ready to feed. And might that be a little bit more on a per meal basis than what you're feeding? It kind of depends a little bit on what you're feeding, but it very well might be. But there are lots of other ways to do this. There are freeze-dried fresh foods. There are dehydrated fresh foods that you add water to. And then obviously you can also make food for your pets. And really, I mean, by far and away, the most cost-effective way to do it is to make it yourself. But as I often tell people, like so many other things in life, it's a trade-off of what's worth more right at this moment, your time or your money.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you're going to make it yourself, it's going to be cheaper, but it's going to take you a little bit of time. So it just depends on sort of where you're at in life as far as that balance goes. But there's always going to be a viable option, from an affordability standpoint, when you compare a high quality, or a very expensive dry food or canned food versus some sort of minimally processed fresh food, there's always something that can be done.
100%. And funnily enough, I hear everything you're saying. And we recently ran at Bella+Duke basically a comparison. And we realized that we're now buying in such large quantities that as a complete balanced, frozen raw provider, we can source better quality for cheaper than consumers can at home. And what we've done is gone direct to consumer so that they can benefit from that.
I think that's outstanding. That, I mean, you've gotten to the point where that economy of scale has really kicked in, and now you can pass that along to pet owners, which is just wonderful that you can do that.
And part of us, educating people is getting the message out there that health is affordable, and we want to make it available to every pet, because everybody deserves that. I love what you're saying about this whole the ability for us to look even into the medium and long term, and the money you save simply by not having to go to the vet, or if you do, it's for more of the fun stuff.
Yep, exactly.
So Gary, if you were to take some top tips for people who wanted to do this at home, obviously your book is a great place to start.
Mm-hmm. So when you say want to do it at home, you mean make food?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
sorry, I thought you were answering the question. I snuck in some water there.
That's okay. So what I generally tell people is, it's not hard to make food at home. The caveat to all of it is if you're going to make food at home, it's really important that you work off of a properly balanced recipe. It's really difficult, if not impossible, to just sort of wing it from the standpoint of feeding meat, feeding vegetables, and being assured that you're getting all the vitamins, all the nutrients, all the minerals that you need in a diet. And, the difference between us and our pets is, we as people, for most of us, and certainly for me, not every meal that I eat is going to be properly nutritionally balanced. But because I eat a wide variety of foods, the presumption is that over time, it all balances out. the hang up with our pets is they tend to eat a very consistent diet one day to the next, which means if that diet is deficient in something, it will come back to haunt them later. It might take months, it might take years, but that stuff gets amplified if they're eating the same thing over and over again. So people just need to work off of a recipe. There's recipes in my book. There's recipes that are derived by nutritionists that people can find online. There are veterinary nutritionists, particularly if your pet has a particular medical condition and may need a very specific diet. There are veterinary nutritionists that can formulate a diet specifically for your pet. So there's lots of ways to do it. The only thing that I recommend people not do is just sort of wing it.
Yeah. I mean, all of that makes sense. And just from avoiding the slow train wreck of food sensitivities and allergies, I always think it's great to involve a variety of proteins.
Agreed.
On a certain day cycle.
Sure.
It's much the same as I would recommend with human clients.
Sure.
If you eat the same thing all the time, your immune system's going to say, whoa, hang on here. This isn't Gary. This is an invader. It's a virus. It's a bacteria. And suddenly you get this whole immunological drain, which could just be avoided with a bit of variety.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's so true. And I very commonly recommend that people rotate through proteins on a periodic basis. The funny thing is that, since you brought that up, I mean, I can remember sitting in my nutrition classes as a veterinary student and the professor saying, put the dog on a high quality dry dog food. And if they do well on it, that's what they're going to eat for the rest of their lives. And that was the logic at the time. And to be quite frank with you, at the time as a veterinary student, I didn't really question it right in that moment, because that's what the professor said was right. Only after, being out in practice for a little while and seeing the effects of these diets and really being able to sort of sit down with some perspective and think about this, that you start realizing, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense at all.
And isn't it strange how we get handed this dogma, and it's from, we call it preeminence medicine, from people that we respect, and all kudos to them. They're doing the very best they've been trained to do.
Absolutely.
And things have moved on. So if I look at my phone from 1998, it's substantially to the one that I'm using in 2020. It's just that in 1998, it was the best that was available. 2020, same story. Yep. We know better. Let's do better.
I agree. You couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh my goodness me. Some of the frightening nutritional things which get sent down. And, I remember seeing when I used to work in London, there was a van that used to go past every morning very early, and it said grains for brains. And I was always tempted to vandalize it with inflamed neurodegenerative.
That would have been more accurate.
It's incredible how marketing, these things stay with us, and it gets repeated often enough, and we just assume it becomes a truism.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you hear something enough times, you start to think it's true.
Gary, is there anything else you'd like to cover before this? I mean, I already would like to invite you back. I think we could do a series of, maybe once a month of half an hour podcasts. I know that people only have a certain amount of time to listen to these at the moment.
Sure.
There's loads more for me to ask you. It depends whether or not you would like to keep it compact, or whether or not there's some other elements you would like to explore.
Well, I mean, without getting too deep into other topics, I think outside of nutrition, to me, the other thing that people should really, really keep in mind, really be aware of as it pertains to their pets is quite frankly something that, again, we all intuitively know for ourselves, but also have a tendency to really be bad at executing, which is preventative medicine is always the best medicine. So It's always easier to prevent an illness than it is to treat it after the fact. So, my urging to people is always, in addition to nutrition, find a veterinarian that can have a chat with you about what supplements that your pet may benefit from, what type of exercise may be right for your particular animal, given their age, their breed, their size, their medical condition, et cetera, et cetera. What vaccines are really necessary, what medications are really necessary. I mean, does your dog or cat have to be on heartworm preventative, have to be on flea and tick medication year round? All of these questions are things that we need to ask. Nothing, I look at pharmaceuticals through the light of, they can be very beneficial, but none of them are completely benign. And if you're talking about using a medication regularly and long-term, are there going to be problems down the road that are going to come up that we're going to have to address? So again, sort of taking that proactive approach to healthcare, and finding a veterinarian that has that same philosophy, which, quite frankly, depending on where you live, may or may not be an easy thing to do. That's really the key to keeping pets healthy for as long as possible.
Dr. Gary, I couldn't have said it better myself, and I wouldn't have expected to, because you're the one who wrote the book and have got more letters after your name than Richard Scary. But 100%, this is a holistic jigsaw. I always look at nutrition as a major part of that, but to think that you can solve and prevent everything purely with nutrition, if your dog's getting exposed to environmental chemicals or excess vaccinations, which themselves often have denatured proteins in, or if it's been shampooed at the groomers with a load of parabens, or these kind of, I once picked up my dog from the groomer who said, wow, the dog's hair's so soft, and I'd taken a specific bottle of dog shampoo, which I'd got actually at a conference in Chicago, paraben-free, sulfate-free, sulfite-free, the whole thing. She said, oh yeah, it's because I cover them in conditioner afterwards. It doesn't matter which conditioner, anything, just the local supermarket makes them really soft. I was crestfallen. I'd taken my own shampoo for the dog, and in the very best intention, it's these kind of things we need to pay attention to, because that is just the doorway to intestinal permeability and all kinds of other.
It is. And like you say, I mean, everybody's operating from a place of they're doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have. And I often remind people that maybe they have some not very nice things to say about sort of the medical establishment. And I have never met a doctor that was not doing what they do from the heart, that was not doing everything that they can to do right by their patients. The issue at hand is they may not have the information that they could use to do a better job. And I think, honestly, to me, that in many ways is one of the barriers to a Western veterinarian, or I presume a Western physician, from kind of turning the corner and moving towards integrative care. As I think part of the problem is if you're going to do that, that means you have to take a moment and look in the mirror and look at yourself and realize that for however many years you've been practicing, maybe you haven't been doing as good a job as you thought you were. Maybe you haven't been serving your patients as well as you thought you were. And that's not an easy realization to deal with as a medical professional, because again, we all want to serve our patients as best we can. And to kind of come to that place, I think it's a difficult realization for some people, and that may be what keeps them, from expanding and turning that corner.
Yeah, 100% agree on all of that. It's something which I like to remind people of, is that if our mission is truly to radically turn the dial on pet wellness, whether it be through nutrition, whether it be through supplementation, which is so important, whether it be through preventative environmental avoidance or chemicals, our biggest potential source of influencers are the vets and the doctors which treat our pets. And we want to be building bridges with them rather than alienating them. And
couldn't agree more.
I think people often turn this into a bit of a kind of schism or spat, when realistically, people who go to university or school to spend 7 years studying how better to look after pets are operating from a good place and good people.
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah. And you know what? The reality is like, there's way easier ways to make a living. You know, there's way easier ways to make $1 than practicing medicine. So, I mean, especially veterinary medicine. I mean, nobody's in this job for the money. It's just, that's just not a thing. So, I mean, it's all about love.
Yeah. Well, I think that is the perfect note to end it on. Dr. Gary, thank you so much for your time. It's welcome. A pleasure to finally interview you. Please do come back and see us again. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions for you, and there's going to be a lot of interest. For anybody watching this who wants to read Dr. Gary's book, we will put the link in the show notes here. And we will also put links to Dr. Gary's bio and his own website here. And Dr. Gary, we look forward to welcoming you back very soon.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you for having me.
The Pet Health and Happiness Podcast from Bella+Duke, keeping you at the cutting edge of pet nutrition, behavior and health with expert interviews, mythbusters and more to help your pet lead a healthier, happier life.